All right. 25 years ago, back in 1993, up in Chicago, Illinois, Frank Zindler, the primary spokesman for the American Atheists Incorporated, participated in a public debate with William Craig, who holds a PhD in theology. They went head-to-head in front of 8,000 people. They had local radio stations come in and broadcast it across the air for the entire event. By the end of the evening, of those who had entered the auditorium as professed atheists, agnostics, and skeptics, an overwhelming 82% concluded that the case for Christianity was most compelling. And a documented 47 people, 47 men and women, actually became Christ followers as a result of that debate. On the flip side, not a single solitary person was known to have become an atheist. So what was it about this debate 25 years ago that was so convicting? What did William Craig say that turned so many people to Christ? He simply defended the resurrection. And rather than turning to the Bible as evidence, he used reason and common sense and logic. He couldn't go to the Bible because, of course, that would have been disputed right off of the bat. So he used common sense, he used reason, he used logic as his evidence. And William Craig helped people see that the only rational conclusion, after looking at all of the evidence, is that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. That Jesus Christ is, in fact, alive today, just as he was 21 centuries ago. Josh McDowell, once a former skeptic himself, is now a Christian author. He is a defender of the faith. I want you to listen to what he has to say. Quote, "After more than 700 hours of studying this subject and a thorough investigation of its foundation, I've come to the conclusion that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is the most fantastic reality in human history." Hank Hanegraaff, director of the Christian Research Institute, wrote this, quote, "The resurrection is not merely indispensable to the historic Christian faith, it elevates Christianity above all other world religions. In the resurrection, Christ demonstrated that he does not stand in a line of peers alongside of Abraham and Buddha and Confucius and Muhammad. Jesus Christ is completely unique. He alone had the power not only to lay down his life, but also to take it up again." Dr. Benjamin Gilbert West and Lord Lyttelton were professors and colleagues at Cambridge University. They set out to combine their brain power, their intellectual capabilities in an effort to destroy Christianity. They were going to put an end to this. So they got together, they took a leave of absence, and they began to study so that they could write a book refuting the resurrection of Jesus Christ. When it was all said and done, their research led them to become fully devoted followers, believers in Jesus Christ. And Benjamin Gilbert West said this, quote, "Reject not," talking about Christ and the Christian faith. He said, "Reject not until you have examined the evidence." Dr. Simon Greenleaf was a skeptic from Harvard Law School. He would openly mock Christians in his classroom, and yet he was challenged by some exceptionally bright students in his class to apply some of the same research principles that he advocated to them. He had actually written many books. He was a published author, and he talked about how to do research, how to look at evidence. And so some of his students pushed back on him and said, "Hey, why don't you apply some of the same research technologies and methodologies you're teaching us in your book? Why don't you apply those to the resurrection of Jesus?" And so he did. And you know what he found? The evidence was so convincing that he too became a Christ follower, and this is what he wrote, quote, "The resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead is one of the best established facts of history." There's another name you may be familiar with, Lee Strobel. Lee was a graduate from Yale University. He was also an award-winning legal journalist at the Chicago Tribune for 13 years. I want you to listen to what he writes. He said, "It was the worst news that I could get as an atheist. My agnostic wife told me she had decided to become a Christian. 2 words shot through my mind. The first was an expletive. The second was divorce. I thought she was going to turn into some self-righteous holy roller, but over the following months I was intrigued by the changes in her character and values. Finally, I decided to use my journalistic research and legal training to investigate whether there was any credibility to Christianity. I figured that I could extricate her from this cult. I soon determined that the alleged resurrection of Jesus was the key. Anyone can claim to be the Son of God, but if Jesus backed up his claim by rising from the dead, then that would be indisputable evidence he was telling the truth. For nearly 2 years, I explored the minutiae of historical data. I did not accept the New Testament at face value. I was determined only to consider the facts that were well supported in secular history. As my research progressed, my atheism began to implode. One by one, my objections evaporated. I read books by skeptics, but their counter-arguments crumbled under the weight of the evidence. No wonder atheists so often come up short in scholarly debates over the resurrection. In the end, after I had thoroughly investigated the matter, I reached an unexpected conclusion. And I want you to listen to what he says. It requires more faith to be an atheist than to be a follower of Jesus. And that's why I'm now celebrating my 34th Easter as a Christian. Not because of wishful thinking or the fear of death or the need of a psychological crutch, but because of the facts. Lee Strobel has written over 20 books defending the Christian faith. He has been for many years the teaching pastor at Woodlands Church in Houston, Texas. And just last year there was a feature film about his conversion called The Case for Christ. I have it on DVD. I purchased it. I put it in the church library. I'd highly encourage you, if you haven't yet, check it out, take it home, watch it. It is a fascinating story of his conversion, of how he tested, how he looked, how he researched and examined the evidence and came to the conclusion that Jesus is in fact who he says he is. All of these examples that I've shared with you this morning is to say that we are indeed left with the inescapable conclusion of Billy Graham, who once said, quote, "If Jesus rose from the dead, it means that He is who He said He was, the Son of God. And the most important thing in life is getting to know Him." Getting to know Him. Do you know the risen Christ? Who is the risen Christ to you this morning? If you have your Bibles, open them up to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 24, same text that we covered in Sunday school this morning. Luke 24. Luke is a doctor, and Luke has taken on the task of investigating and writing a thorough historical account of Jesus' life for his friend Theophilus. And so he's heard all of this stuff about Jesus, and so he's going to examine it, he's going to investigate it, he's going to research it, and he's going to put all the evidence together for Theophilus. And in chapter 24, Luke tells about two men who had gotten to know Jesus. It's the afternoon of Resurrection Day as these two fellows are walking the 7-mile journey from Jerusalem to Emmaus. So they're on the road to Emmaus. They got a 7-mile walk, and these guys are downhearted. You see, they had personally witnessed the events that unfolded those previous few days in the holy city. They were there. They had seen how Jesus had been celebrated and worshipped and made His way triumphantly into the city. This was the Messiah. This was the King. This was the long-awaited one that everybody had been waiting for. And He comes into the city riding on the foal of a donkey. And yet that very same week, just a few days later, we find that He is betrayed. He is abandoned. He is denied. He's arrested. He gets mocked and scourged and ultimately nailed to a cross, crucified, hung among thieves. And their hope hung on that cross as well. And when that body was taken down, their hope came down with it. And when Jesus was placed in a tomb, their hope went in that tomb right along with Him. And so here these guys are. They're making their way back home. Their anticipation has now given way to depression. Their hope for the long-awaited Messiah had given way to despair. And as they return back home now, downcast and defeated, Jesus comes up alongside them. and joins them in their journey, although they don't recognize that that's who it actually is. And so here in Luke 24, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of track the progress of their relationship with Jesus as they get to know Him. And as we do, I just want to challenge you this morning to consider the nature of your own relationship with Jesus. Where do you stand with Christ? Who is the risen Christ to you? Who is Jesus to you? Is Jesus nothing more than a stranger? Somebody you don't know, somebody you don't recognize. Look at verse 13. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened, and as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus Himself came up and walked along with them. But they were kept from recognizing Him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" And they stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked Him, "Are you the only one visiting in Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened here these last few days? Are you serious? Where in the world are you from? You don't know what's going on? You haven't heard the news? You haven't read the papers? You didn't get the Instagram and the Facebook posts? I mean, come on, it's everywhere. Oh, everybody knows what's going on around here. Where are you from, dude?" And it's pretty clear from the text that Cleopas and his friend, they don't recognize Jesus. They don't know who He is. Jesus is just a stranger. To them, He was nothing more than a stranger. They had no idea this was the risen Christ. When He approached them and joined them as they walked along, the Bible says that they were kept from recognizing Him. And maybe that's where some of you are this morning. To you, Jesus is simply a stranger. You may know some things about Jesus, yet you don't truly know Him. There's no relationship there. There are many people today who are kept from recognizing Jesus for various reasons. For some, it could be due to family origin. You know, during their growing up years, they've been spiritually insulated. You know, there are plenty of homes today where Bible stories are never read to children, where prayers are never uttered before meals or bedtime. No pictures on the wall with Bible verses printed on them or Christian songs being played in the home or in the car on the radio. Weekend worship is never on the family schedule. Children root group activities are not a priority. Spiritual values are never elevated. Godly counsel isn't shared. And if you're here this morning and you were raised in such a family, then Jesus is likely very much a stranger to you. Perhaps your family wasn't spiritually insulated as much as it was spiritually divided. I heard about a Catholic woman who married a Jewish man. They had some children and then ultimately got divorced. Now they're fighting over their children about how they should be raised religiously. The fight is so intense they've actually taken it to the court systems. And the default legal position determined by the judge is that the children should be exposed to neither religion, neither Judaism nor Catholicism. So for those poor kids, Jesus is probably going to be a stranger. Then there's those families that are just spiritually resistant. Sometimes it's a mom or a dad, maybe a grandparent, older sibling, cousin, aunt, uncle, who's actively critical or openly opposed to anything related to the Bible or God or the church. They see anything religious as somehow damaging to their children's personal development. And the result for them is that likely Jesus will be a stranger to them as well. Of course, there are other reasons that Jesus could be a stranger aside from family origin. Might be related to secular education. You know, there was once a time in public education where it underpinned, it actually fortified the Christian faith of students. Of course, we know that's not the case today, right? Particularly in institutions of higher education, the Bible is ridiculed. It is undermined. It is simply ignored. Jesus is reduced to being one of several historical teachers of just a conservative moral value mindset. The church is often marginalized or maligned, and Christians are viewed as nothing more than dogmatic intolerance. Maybe it's something deeper, more personal than a formal education. It may be that Jesus is a stranger because of your wounds, because of something that's happened to you. Perhaps you've been personally offended. Maybe you've been financially victimized by a professed Christian. And that offense has taken you down a path in the opposite direction of Jesus. Could have been a nominal Christian relative who was abusive or dogmatic or critical or hypocritical. Worldly distractions is another possibility as to why Jesus is a stranger to you. You've just been preoccupied with other things. It's never been important. You're more concerned about your lifestyle, your image, your career, your busy schedule, your social life. Your life's just so full. I don't have time for any of that stuff. I don't have time for spiritual matters. I got too many other things. And so it's just not important to you. So because of the overcommitment in life or just the plain old disinterest, Jesus remains a stranger to you. Who is the risen Christ to you this morning? Then again, maybe that's not the case at all. Perhaps Jesus is not really a stranger to you at all. Maybe, perhaps, He's more like a teacher for you this morning. Let's look at verse 25. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the Scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering His glory?" Then Jesus took them through all the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from the Scriptures the things concerning Himself. Now, when Jesus first joined up with these guys on the road, it seemed as though He was the one who needed to be informed. Right? He comes up, He says, "Hey, what are you all upset about?" And they say, "Where in the world have you been?" And so they set about to educating Him. Right? It's their response. They're going to get Him up to speed. They're going to teach Him a thing or two about all the events that have transpired. And they quickly realize, however, that it was they who needed the education. And it was Jesus who would be their teacher. Jesus quickly points out their misunderstandings of the Messiah. He teaches them the full truth concerning Himself. So let me ask you a question this morning. Is Jesus your teacher? In a world of insanity, in a world of hype and spin, in a world of distortion and manipulation, in the world of propaganda and alternate facts and fake news, where do you go to find the truth? Where can you find truth? From what or from whom do you derive your perspective on life? Whom do you consult when you're trying to decide what kind of person you want to be? What values you should embrace? What decisions you should make? What moral standards you should uphold? From whom do you seek guidance about the close friendships you cultivate or the person that you should marry or how you should successfully bring up your children? Do you go to politicians? Do you turn to the movie stars? Maybe the self-help books or the daily horoscope? Maybe a letter into Dear Abby. Some look to internet bloggers. Some turn to talk show hosts like Dr. Phil or some other secular psychologist or social scientist or popular author. Or is Jesus Christ where you turn? Do you turn to Jesus? For He alone, the Bible says, is the way and the truth and the life. And we get His wisdom by staying near Him in prayer, in worship, in the study of His Word, and by being partnered with Him in service. Is Jesus your teacher today? If He is, let me encourage you, that's good. That's really good. However, I want to challenge you a little more. And I want to encourage you to take that relationship a step further. Go a little deeper. And let me ask you, do you know Jesus as a friend? Is there a relationship there? Is Jesus your friend? Verse 28. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if He were going further. But they urged Him strongly, "Stay with us. It's nearly evening. The day's almost over." So He went in to stay with them. I'm sure the last thing Cleopas and his buddy ever thought when they left Jerusalem that afternoon is that they were going to make a new friend on the way home. And yet, that's exactly what happened. As they walked along that dusty road, Jesus quickly earned their affection and their trust. Listen, friends, anyone who is willing to drop their guard long enough to walk and talk with Jesus for very long will eventually be captivated by Him. He's got that about Him. Everywhere He went, people were drawn to Him. And the list of people who initially set out to undermine the faith in Jesus, in the process of doing the research and spending the time in His life, in His teaching, seeing and examining the evidence, looking at the facts over and over and over again, these people, one after another, end up becoming His disciples. That list just gets longer and longer all the time. C.S. Lewis wrote one of the books, an incredible book, Mere Christianity. It's a book that has helped convert thousands of intellectuals to Christ. C.S. Lewis started out as a skeptic. General Lew Wallace, author of Ben-Hur, said in his autobiography, "I was not in the least influenced by religious sentiment. I had no convictions about God or Christ. Didn't think about Him, did not think about Him. Had no convictions whatsoever." This is what he said, though. Through his research, through the writing of Ben-Hur, by learning and digging in to the story of Christ, he said, quote, "I found myself writing reverentially and frequently with awe." In fact, if you go on the Ben-Hur website, there is actually a website for Ben-Hur I was looking around, and this is what General Wallace found. It says right on the website that he found himself transfixed and transformed by the life of Jesus Christ. You know, we go back and we look at the verses again. Did you happen to notice as they were walking along the road and they get into town where they're going to stay, and Jesus kind of acts like He's going to keep going further? Did you catch that? The men, they're ready to stop. Jesus, He just kind of keeps going. Jesus will not intrude on your life. He is a gentleman. He never forces Himself on anyone. He waits for us to invite Him into our homes and into our lives. And if you choose not to, if you don't bother to respond, He'll keep going. He wants to stay with us. He wants to be a part of your life. He wants to be your friend. He wants to have that relationship with you. You just have to invite Him in. Now here at Station Camp Christian Church, we always close our service every week with an invitation. And when we get to invitation time, you know, we sing an invitation hymn, and we always tend to think of the invitation as being from Jesus, right? Jesus is tenderly calling you home, right? The invitation is from Christ. Christ is inviting you into a relationship. He's inviting you into this friendship. He's inviting you into this one-on-one with Him. This morning, I'd like to flip that just a bit. And I'd like to challenge you to consider the invitation this morning as a time not where Jesus is inviting you, but where you are inviting Christ into your life, into your heart for all time and eternity. A friend who sticks closer than a brother, a friend who loves at all times, a friend who laid down His life for you and for me, a friend like no other friend. Jesus said in Revelation chapter 3, "Look, I stand at the door and knock." Doesn't say that He stands at the door and beats it down. He doesn't pull the hinges off or bust His way through with a big shoulder or a foot kick through. He stands at the door and He knocks. If you hear my voice and open the door, I will come in and we will share a meal together. As strangers? As your teacher? What's it say? As friends. As friends. Relationship. Well, there's one final way that we can know Him. Actually, it's the most important way of all. Let me ask you this morning, who is the risen Christ to you? Is He your Lord? Verse 30, when He was at the table with them, He took bread, He gave thanks, He broke it, began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened. They began to recognize him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and he opened the Scriptures to us? You go back earlier that afternoon, the two had said to each other with downcast faces, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped, but now our hope is gone. We've lost that hope. We're discouraged. We're depressed. After the crucifixion, all hope was gone. Only now, after this conversation with Jesus, their hope is restored. Their disappointment and doubt and disillusionment, discouragement, defeat, it is now all replaced with a single word, Lord. You see, Jesus is the Lord of hope. If you want hope in your life, make Jesus your Lord of your life. He is not only the Messiah, the hope of Israel, He is the hope, the Lord of every nation, every tribe, every people, every language. Jesus is the hope of every soul in the whole wide world. And the greatest pronouncement that you and I could ever make is this: Jesus Christ is my Lord. Is Jesus your Lord today? As we celebrate the resurrection of Christ on this Easter morning, may I ask you this simple question: who is Jesus Christ to you? Is He a stranger? Because that can change right here today if you want it to. Is He your teacher? That's good. That's a great step. It's not nearly enough, though, because Jesus is so much more than that. Is He a friend? Is He somebody that you've accepted and you call on when you're in a personal crisis of some kind? That's good too. But listen, our eyes will not be fully opened. Our hearts will not burn within us until we submit to Christ as Lord of all. Full surrender to Jesus as Lord. No longer a stranger, absolutely a teacher, certainly a friend. But most importantly, is Christ your Lord today? It's interesting when you look through this account here in Luke. There were two men on that road to Emmaus. Two guys, right? And Jesus joined those two men. We know the name of one of them, Cleopas. What's the name of the other? We're never told. We don't know that person's name. But maybe, just going to take a little preacherly leap here, maybe the reason we don't know that name is because Christ is asking you to put your name there. That you become a follower of Jesus. That you invite Christ into your life. That Jesus becomes your Lord. Jesus emphatically is my Lord. And I encourage you this morning that if He is not yours, do not leave this place without changing that. Come and say, hey, I want Christ to be my Lord. And if you're ready to put your name there, Cleopas and Wendell, Cleopas and Ashley, Cleopas and Vicky, Cleopas and Scott, Cleopas in your name, if you're willing to do that, I want to invite you to come down front here this morning and just surrender yourself to Him and invite Jesus into your life today. Our hymn of invitation is 220. Jesus is all the world to me. And I'd just like to ask you to stand with me, and if there's a decision on your heart, if you're ready to go from Jesus being a stranger to Jesus being your Lord, please come and surrender. Please invite Christ into your life. Let's all stand. We'll sing.